Hi guys, welcome to my tutorial about the Kettlebell Pentathlon. So this is just a quick guide to help especially newcomers with the lifting. Just little points that you want to bear in mind. Make sure that every single rep you do counts. No one wants to get no counts. Okay, so obviously some of you will be fairly experienced already in pentathlon, but this might serve as a small refresher, so it's still worthwhile watching. Okay, so let's first of all look at points which are pertinent to all lifts. Alignment is a big one. Arm as straight as possible in the locked out overhead position. Now this of course may be dependent on your mobility. If you have a slightly bent arm in the overhead, just make the judge aware, and then at that point on the judge will be looking to make sure that that bent arm does not get worse as the set progresses. So it's not a problem to have a bent arm, but it must not get worse as you go on. Okay, so just be mindful of that and just make sure you let the judge know that your lockout is what it is, just so it doesn't give you no reps unnecessarily. Body facing forwards with no twisting of the hips. Okay, so we need alignment through the hips, through the torso, everything's facing forward. Occasionally people tend to twist as the set goes on. You might end up at a bit of an angle to the judge. Just be mindful, the judge should correct you anyway, but just be mindful that you are always facing the judge and the hips are square on. Arm close to your ear and not too far forward or out to the side. Okay, so basically you don't want your arm too far in front of your torso and not too far out to the side either. Again, this might depend a little bit on mobility, but just keep it in check, just be mindful, and if the judge points it out, just try and improve in those areas. Static bell in the overhead and racked position. Okay, so this is fixation. Okay, so whenever you're in the overhead, the bell should be static, just momentarily. It can't be bobbing up and down, it can't be wavering from side to side. Okay, especially in a half snatch, if you corkscrew the bell up, make sure the bell stops corkscrewing. It's actually static for a while before you unwind it back down to the rack. Okay, that's very important that you have good overhead stability. And also of course in the racked position, you need to make sure that the bell, when it lands in rack, it is also static, but not just the bell, but also your entire body is not moving, not swaying backwards and forwards. That's also very important. The rack is also, of course, important with the various lifts that are coming up. You have to rest in rack before doing a press, for example. We'll get to that when we get to the lift. Okay, so a brief pause in those positions, long enough to demonstrate full fixation to the judge. Okay, the judge shouldn't have to be second guessing whether it's fixated or not. Just leave the judge with no doubt that that rep is fixated. Okay, don't be chasing numbers. If you can do the numbers with good form, that's all well and good. But if you're trying to get 108 reps with half snatch and every other reps at no count, then that's no good to anybody. So just slow down, only go at a pace which your experience will allow you to go at. Okay, next one, legs locked out as best as possible and arms as straight as current mobility limits allow. So we are always mindful of mobility, as I've already mentioned, but the legs should be as straight as possible when you're in the rack or in the overhead position. It's just you won't be penalised necessarily if your legs are slightly bent, of course, in the rack. That's perfectly okay, but you don't want to see an excessive bending of the legs. Okay, so let's get into it. Cleans first. So this is 120 reps maximum, or 20 reps per minute. 1 point of fixation in the rack position. Swing change only, no speed switch. Get your legs as straight as current mobility allows in the rack position, and keep the whole body as static as possible in rack. Okay, let's take a look. Okay guys, here we are with a clean. First up, you're all fresh, raring to go. Normally your heaviest bell, big point scorer. Make sure every rep counts. Okay, so this is 20 RPM now. There's plenty of time in the 6 minutes to get 120 reps. My advice, as always, is not to rush. Use those 6 minutes. Swing change, okay, no speed switch on this one. good reps, good fixation, everything's nice and still, nothing swaying around. Okay, so let's now show you some no counts. Okay, so here we have 0 fixation. This is probably about 25, 26 RPM. We'll finish in 5 minutes, but we end up with no counts. Every one of those is a no rep. Again, this is no repping. There's too much sway. The bell might be in rack long enough, but it's constantly moving, never still. No counts. Okay, so that's a good rep again. Nice long pause. Now this is a no count because the legs are excessively bent in rack. A little bit of bend is perfectly acceptable, but we don't want to see an excess of bend, and we don't want to see it get worse as the set goes on. But we are talking excessive bending of the legs to get no count, so don't fret over it too much. Now this is a violation, so this is a -1. Do that continuously, it'll be a stop set. If you do get a stop set, it will only affect that set. You can then do the next set if there is one to follow. Next up, we have long cycle press, or clean and press. 60 reps maximum, 10 reps a minute. 2 points of fixation, 1 in the rack after each clean, and again in the overhead position. Very, very important that you treat this as 2 separate movements. So fixate in rack first before you do the press, and then fixate in the overhead position. On the way back down, you can just bounce and go. So the judge will need to see an obvious pause in the rack after the clean. View the clean and the press, as I've already said, as 2 separate movements. Okay, that way there's no confusion. Lock the legs straight as you press. Okay, so think about flexing your quads. You want to press from a firm foundation anyway, so that will help you power the press up. You lock your legs, okay, get your quads nice and tight. Okay, the judge will be checking that there is zero flex of the knee at the start of the press. Okay, so that's very important. Also, as the press goes up, we then don't want to see an excessive bend as the bell gets kind of halfway through and near the top of the movement. Just try and keep those legs locked out as much as possible. And then the legs must remain locked as you press the bell overhead. Fixate at the overhead position, leave the judge in no doubt, and on the way back down you can just bounce and go from the rack. Heels must stay down in the press. You can raise the heels on the drop, that's not a problem, but heels must stay down in the press. The judges will be looking out for that one. Swing and change only with a long cycle press, no speed switch. Okay, and the judge will want to see, as always, good alignment in the overhead position. Okay, so now we have clean and press. So think of this as 2 distinct movements. Clean, pause, lock the legs, press, fixate, bounce and go on the way back down. On the way back on the first rack, you have to make sure you pause before you do the press. Okay, so these are good reps, 10 RPM, easily doable. Don't go too fast, use the extra time to make your reps look better. Good long fixation, leave the judge in no doubt. Okay, so they are good reps. Now let's look at a few problems. Okay, so here we have no pause in the initial rack there. The bell is in rack and then straight up. 2 movements aren't being separated. Pause, then press. Now with that rep, there's no fixation in the overhead. It's up and straight down. That is a no count. No fixation. Now this is a push press, so you're using your legs to initiate the movement. Again, that is a no count. Okay, that's a push press. And here we have the legs are initially locked out on the press, but then they bend excessively as the bell approaches the midpoint and the rest of the way up. Again, these are no counts.
Okay, this is the no count because the heels are raising. The feet have to remain grounded. We don't mind you raising the heels on the drop, but as the bell goes up, heels must remain down. That's clean and press.
Jerk. 120 reps maximum, 20 reps a minute. 1 point of fixation in the overhead. Judge will need to see a clear second dip of the knees. No bounce outs. A clear pause must be seen in the rack after lowering from the overhead position. If you absorb on the catch, straighten the legs before dipping for the first dip. Not doing this would be classed as a bounce out. Good alignment in the overhead position. Speed switch is allowed.
Next we have jerk. 120 reps, 20 RPM. Show some good reps first. Okay. Clear, second dip. Good fixation, no bounce outs. Gets back to rack, there's a pause, then first dip, fixation at the top. Now this is speed switch, it can certainly save you a lot of time. Again, these are good reps. Okay, now let's throw a few faults in. There's a lack of fixation, clearly. Bell is not static at all at the top. It's up and straight down, never settles. And these are bounce outs, so as the bell lands in rack, the knees are immediately bending. These are no reps. If you bend to absorb on the way back down, straighten first, then re-dip. Like so. Okay, next fault will be no second dip, landing on straight legs. So you get the first dip's good, but then there's no second dip to speak of whatsoever. You're landing on straight legs, these are no counts. You must have a second dip, which is clear for the judge to see. Don't forget a speed switch. Once again, good reps. I'm hoping you can distinguish between the good and the bad here. Again, that's a violation. You bring the hand across to touch the bell. Also keep your hand off the body. Don't rest your hand on your leg. Don't rest the free hand on any part of your body in any of the lifts.
Half snatch. 108 rep maximum, that's 18 RPM. 1 point of fixation in the overhead position. You can bounce and go on the way back down. Okay, so okay to bounce and go on the drop from the overhead, so no need to pause in rack. The kettlebell just needs to be seen moving away from the body and can't be a straight drop down. Good fixation and alignment in the overhead position. Swing change only.
Next up is half snatch. 108 reps, 18 RPM max. So let me show you some good reps first. Good, clear fixation. Bell's not oscillating at the top, not bouncing up and down. Body's nice and still. Hips facing the camera. Everything nice and straight. Arm is aligned as I can get my arm aligned. Okay, so these are countable reps. And this is a swing change, not a speed switch. Okay, so here we have no fixation at the top, it's just too quick. So now we have sway, so the bell is up there long enough, but it's just constantly moving around, nothing is static. It's not just about keeping the bell up there long enough, it's about keeping the bell up there and keeping it still. Now we have push outs. The bell lands on the back of the wrist and then you're pushing out to complete the rep. Is again a no counts. The arm must be straight as the bell lands on the back of the wrist, like so. Okay, now we have too much sway of the body. Nothing's ever really still. Okay, so just keep everything nice and solid as the bell lands overhead, like so. If it takes you a while to settle the bell and rack, just take that time. Just don't rush it. Better to get 90 reps that are good than 108 reps and get 30 no counts. That's half snatch.
Push press, 120 reps maximum. 1 point of fixation in the overhead position. As with the jerk, the judge will need to see a pause before the press. If you absorb on the drop from the overhead, make sure you stand up straight before dipping for the press. If you don't do this, it's known as a bounce out. Heels must stay down in the press. They can rise in the drop only. Good fixation and alignment in the overhead position. Speed switch is allowed.
And finally we have push press. Now you're very fatigued at this point, very easy to get it wrong. Let me show you some good reps first. Okay, single dip off the legs, good strong press, no second dip, heels staying down. Again, you can raise the heels on the drop, but certainly not on the press. Judges will be very hot on this. This is also a speed switch, which can certainly help speed things up. Good fixation, good alignment. Single bend of the legs. Right, let's throw some faults in there. Okay, that's no fixation. Bell is wavering around at the top. It's up there for long enough, but it's just never still. And then have no fixation at all, it's just straight up and straight down. No reps. Far too quick. Okay, now we have heels leaving the ground. Even if it's marginal, the judge will pick up on it. So really make sure your heels are grounded. Lifting shoes or minimalist shoes really help here. Running shoes do not help with this type of thing. Now we have a bounce out, like the jerk. This will be a no count. If you bend to absorb, make sure you come to straight legs first before dipping for the next rep. Now we have excessive leaning. As the bell goes up, the legs are bending. These are no counts as well. Try and keep the legs as straight as possible once you initiate the press. Like so. These are now good reps. And that's it, guys. I hope that helps. A lot to take in there, but hopefully you'll have a smashing day and get a great score.